Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, good morning. So excited to see you all. Thank you for being here this morning. We just need another minute for people to get on. I want to thank Sean Sander for being our Zoom master today. Good morning, Sean. Thank you so much. And I would love to invite everyone who's on the call to show your faces so that I could actually see you if you are comfortable. It's just much easier to teach on Zoom when you can see people's faces. If you're comfortable, I would appreciate it. If not, I accept, but it makes a better conversation when we are looking at one another. So good morning. Let me kind of frame it, and then we will say the blessing for learning Torah together, and then I'll ask Sean to show the screen. I am loving this particular class, this subject, because it's so interesting to me in so many ways. We're going to be looking at, for so many reasons. First, we're looking at a portion, Numbers 19, that is utterly dry, opaque, and to a modern sensibility, especially to people who incline towards secular world, just a turnoff. I mean, when you read this, you think to yourself, this is why I never go to shul. Or when you read this, you think to yourself, oh my God, this is just not even me. It's just very dry and you know, very challenging. Hold on a second. I think Sean is trying to say something. Sean, the material. Okay, second. So Sean, the materials. Give me 1 second, people. I need to send this thing to Sean. I thought it was sent to him. Hold on 1 second. Give me 1 second, please. Sean, I just sent them to you. If you can confirm, please, that you got them. I just sent it to you.
In the Fruitlands.
So when you first look at this, it's from Numbers 19, and it is called the Para Aduma, the red heifer. Yeah. And in it, you might have heard about it, but basically in biblical Israel, if you are, you know, biblical Israel is so about life and living, uvacharta b'chaim, choose life, that if you're in contact with the dead, then you are ritually impure and you're not allowed to go into the holiest parts of the community, the temple or the tabernacle, etc. And so if you're in touch with the dead, then you're kind of quarantined for 7 days. And how do you get admitted? How do you get readmitted? The answer is found in Numbers 19. And what happens is they find a red heifer, a cow, that is without blemish, and they burn up the cow and reduce it to ashes. They take hyssop and scarlet and cedar, and they burn that up and reduce it to ashes. They take this potion of burnt cow and hyssop, scarlet, and cedar, and they put it in some water, and they spritz the water on the person who was in contact with the dead. They do it on day 3 and on day 7. And that person who was impure and who was spritzed with this magic potion is now ritually pure. They go from impure to pure and can now enter the tabernacle. Okay. No one's ever understood that. And so one question we have this morning, and it feels dry, just like so dry. One question is, what does this mean? Here's the second question. What's the connection to Passover? Because we're in this season of special Shabbatot, where our rabbinic tradition has seen fit to have several Shabbatot to tell us Shabbat is coming. I mean, Pesach is coming, Pesach is coming, Pesach is coming. This coming Shabbat, for example, is Shabbat HaChodesh, where it's Rosh Chodesh Nisan, that tells us Pesach is in 2 weeks. And the Shabbat before Shabbat Chodesh, that is last Shabbat, was Shabbat Para, where we read Numbers 19 about this opaque ritual. And the question is, what does Numbers 19 have to do with Passover? Okay, so one question is, what does it mean on its face? The second is, what's the connection between this weird, opaque ritual and Passover? Why do the rabbis ask us to read this and consider it before our Pesach Seder? What does a burnt cow have to do with our Pesach Seder? The third thing about this class that I'm very excited about is that I believe that Jonathan Sachs's essay on this issue is utterly unique and brilliant, and is something that is very rare. It's a new thought in the world of biblical scholarship. So the question of what's the meaning of the red cow ceremony, can everyone please mute, because I'm hearing ambient noise. Sean, if you can please mute everybody. I see some phones that are not muted, and Sean, if you can mute everybody, that would be awesome. What I'm loving about this lesson that we're going to look at is that Jonathan Sachs's essay is truly a unique idea. You're going to see that the other explanations for this are not very satisfying, but Jonathan Sachs's explanation, to my knowledge, he is the first and only person to articulate this explanation, is not only satisfying, it's beautiful and emotional. And it moves, and here's the Bafo conclusion. I have two Bafo conclusions for you. It moves this text of Numbers 19 from the driest and most opaque of all texts to the juiciest and most emotional and most personal of all issues, which is the meaning of our own mortality. That is to say, I mean, I'll take my father-in-law, for example. He's 93 and a half. He'll be 94 in June. When my father-in-law sits down to his Pesach Seder this year, it must occur to him to wonder, how many more Pesach Seders do I have left? You know, how many more Pesach Seders do I have left? How many more times am I going to be sitting with my children and grandchildren doing this ritual that I have loved for many decades? And you don't have to be 94 to ask that question. Wherever we are at in life, particularly in this season of precariousness, it's a natural question. I love Pesach, I love the Seders, I love my children and grandchildren, I love being with them in sacred dialogue. How many more Passovers do I have left? And a concomitant of that question, is, if I'm wondering how many Pesach Seders do I have left, can I even enjoy this one? How do I enjoy this Pesach? How do I enjoy this moment? How do I enjoy this Pesach Seder if tick-tock, 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 I'm wondering how many do I have left? And I think what you're going to see is that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, on this opaque text, gives us the most beautiful answer. So we move from opaque and dry to juicy and beautiful and resonant, just like that. So that is my framing of our text today. And I hope to answer all those questions. What does it mean? Why do the rabbis bring it to us, Erev Pesach, and what's the resonance for our lives? So in a minute, I'm going to get into the text and invite our colleague Sean to screen share. But first, any questions about the framing or the basic subject matter before I get into the text? And if you would like to just chat your question, by all means, feel free to do that as well. Anybody? Okay, Sean, can I invite you please to screen share the first two, or actually it's going to be the first 3 pages. Okay, thank you so much. So this was the reading from the Maftir Aliyah, yet last Shabbos. By the way, a news flash, we're back. There's energy back. We had 2 bat mitzvahs and we had a baby naming, and we had special milestone events, and we had kind of pre-pandemic energy. So feel free to come back to shul when you feel comfortable. And at shul, we read this, okay? And I need to begin with this first paragraph because this is going to be key to how this was interpreted before Jonathan Sacks, okay? The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron saying, this is the ritual law that the Lord has commanded. And the Hebrew is Chukat HaTorah. It's that's giving the portion its name. And chok is the singular noun. Chukad is smichud. It's a grammatical form of juxtaposition in biblical Hebrew. But the singular, if it's not in this smichud form, is called chok, chet vav kuf. And chok is taken to mean an ordinance that of God that you cannot understand except for God said it, right? So if I tell you don't murder, don't steal, don't commit adultery, you know, we would have come up with that on our own. But this is the opposite of that. This we would never, ever know, except for the fact that God told us. That makes it a chok. And this is the most famous of all the chukim. So Sean, I'll take page 2, please. Keep going to page 2. Perfect. Okay, here we go. Instruct the Israelite people to bring you a red cow, para aduma. By the way, just for no extra charge, I'll tell you this. The mascot of Gan Academy, you know, the Jewish high school, in addition to Maimonides, that is in Greater Boston, that many of our kids attend, Michelle's kids attend, my kids graduated, etc. The mascot of it is the para aduma, the red heifer. It's the Gan red heifers, okay? Instruct the Israelite people to bring you a red cow without a blemish, to which there is no defect, and on which no yoke has been laid. You shall give it to Eleazar the priest. It shall be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. Eleazar the priest shall take some of its blood with his finger and sprinkle it 7 times towards the front of the tent of meeting. The cow shall be burned in his sight. Its hide, flesh, and blood shall be burned, its dung included. And the priest shall take the cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson stuff and throw them into the fire, consuming the cow. Okay? Then, you know, it turns out this is going to be an odd paradox about this whole business, which we, if anyone wants to comment on, you can, but it's another one of the many parts of this that nobody has ever understood. And actually, even Jonathan Sacks does not address this. An additional paradox to all this is that this potion, which is put in with water, when it's sprinkled on the person who's impure because you've been in contact with the dead, you get pure. But all the people who participate in preparing this business, they all are rendered impure. So verse 7, the priest shall wash his garments, but he shall be impure until evening. Verse 8, he who performed the burning shall wash his garments, and he is impure until evening. Keep going there, Sean. If you would, please continue with the page. Sean, if I can have some more of the text, please. Sean? Sorry for the technical difficulties. Sean, can I get some more of that text, please? If we can go back to screen share.
Just one moment, Wes. I'm sorry, one moment. Apologize, everyone. My Adobe program crashed. It'll be open in just one moment.
No worries. Thank you, Sean. We live in the era of technology and therefore technological challenges that end up coming up. Thank you, Sean. Okay, and if you go, so where keep going down on page, keep going over here. Oh, actually go back up to page 2 for a second. Here we were. and go up a little bit more so we can see more of page 2. Okay, so I was saying, that's good, Sean, thank you. So I was saying that that you create this whole ash situation of the burnt cow and the hyssop and the cedar and the crimson, and everybody who participates in this becomes impure. I'm going to go down to verse 10. He who gathers up the ashes of, and then Sean, if we could have page 3 of the handout, please. Perfect, thank you. He who gathers up the ashes of the cow shall also wash his clothes and be impure until evening. So now you have this it's a number one, you have this weird thing that the cow and the hyssop and scarlet are burnt. Everybody who engages that is now rendered impure. But now what happens? This shall be a permanent law for the Israelites and for strangers who reside among you. He who touches the corpse of any human being shall be impure for 7 days. And again, we love life, not death. Think about Egypt and mummies, and they put all this gold in mummies. And we're not a death cult. We're the opposite of a death cult. We're a life cult. So we stay. So biblical law had this whole idea of tuma, ritual impurity, to make sure that we are a religion of life. So if you touch the corpse of any human, you're impure for 7 days. He shall purify himself with it. That's this water that's got these ashes on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and then be pure. If he fails to pure himself on the 3rd and 7th day, he shall not be pure. Whoever touches a corpse, the body of a person who has died, does not purify himself, defiles the Lord's tabernacle. That person shall be cut off from Israel, since the water of lustration was not dashed on him. He remains impure. His impurity is still upon him. Okay, so Sean, I'll come back to the full screen, please. So what you have here is that's Numbers 19. And why, what's the why of it? What's the rationale for it? And again, what's the connection of that to Passover? So let me just pause and invite any thoughts, comments, and questions. And then I'll give you the state of play before Jonathan Sachs. Any thoughts, comments, or questions on this opaque tradition? Elise Friedman, is your hand up? No, okay. Okay, so Sean, if you can go now to, I think, page 5 of the handout. This is going to be Jonathan Sachs's piece on it. Okay. So he notes, and you'll notice it's called Kohelet, Tolstoy, and the Red Heifer. You'll also note that he wrote it in 2020. So he wrote it right before he died. He wrote it in the shadow of his own advancing cancer. And in very Jonathan Sachs fashion, he's going to bring together eclectic sources. In the history of mankind and in the history of Judaism, nobody ever brought together Kohelet, Tolstoy, and the Red Heifer before Jonathan Sachs, okay? Now, he asks, keep going down there. Sean, if you can go lower that, more text, please. More text. He's just going to describe all that happens, etc. Keep going. Sean, keep going down to page 5. Please go. Okay. Keep go. Okay. Now, we'll stop there. The state of play before Jonathan Sachs is that that the only reason we do it is, and this is kind of the majority view before Jonathan Sachs, the majority view is, why would we ever do this? And the answer is because God said. This is that voice of when a kid says to the dad, why do I have to? Or says to the mom, why do I have to? And the parent says, because I said. That's the first explanation, and that's kind of the most famous one. That is, it's a law whose logic we cannot understand. It makes sense to God, but it makes no sense to us. And it's a command issued for no other reason than to reward us for obeying it. That's part 1. Keep going down there, Sean. More text, please, Sean. Keep going more. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Pause right there, please. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Then Maimonides has another view, which is, I don't like that Maimonides says, because that view posits that there's no rational, coherent reason for it other than God said it. And Maimonides is the arch rationalist. So he writes the Chukim only appear to be inexplicable because we have forgotten the original context in which they were ordained. Each of them was a rejection of and education against some idolatrous practice. For the most part, such practices have died out, which is why we now find the commands hard to understand. So Maimonides says there must have been a reason, but we just don't know what it is. Okay, so you got one reason is it's because God said. The second is it has to do with some hoary, ancient, now lost historical practice. It's a polemic against, idolatry or avodah zarah, idol worship, and we just don't know what it was bumping up against. A third view adopted by Nachmanides, further articulated by Samson Raphael Hirsch in the 19th. Sean, if I can have page 6, please. Okay, is the Chukim were laws designed to teach the integrity of nature. Nature has its own laws, domains, and boundaries, to cross which is to dishonor the divinely created order and threaten nature itself. That one I never understood. Now, if you're a lawyer or a retired lawyer, you know that if you have to come up with 3 lame arguments for something, you're in trouble, right? 3 lame arguments means you have no one powerful argument. This last one about the integrity of nature just doesn't even get off just doesn't even begin to rise to a coherent thought. How is it that, burning a cow in hyssop and scarlet and putting it in water is integrity in nature? That's just words. There's nothing there. So far you really have this opaque law, and the best and because Nachmanides' answer about nature is so weak, it almost never gets raised. Maimonides, because he's Maimonides, people raise it, but it's also not very satisfying. So I would say the leading explanation until Jonathan Sacks comes around for why the opaque red heifer ritual is we just don't understand it, but when we do it, it is a gesture of love towards God. Okay, now we're going to leave the dry, opaque part of our class and move to the real human, resonant, emotional thing. This is as juicy as it gets. This is about the fastest pivot from dry to juicy you'll see in any class. Sean, if I can have a little bit more text, please. Good, thank you. My own view, by the way, he writes this when he's dying. He writes this when he's dying. Now the reader knows this. If you know the story, he doesn't mention his own death, which is just like the self-restraint or his own dying. The self-restraint is just so poignant here, right? But that's it. So just dear reader, I'm telling you, know that he's writing all of this in the shadow of his own death. He's about to celebrate his last Pesach. My own view, his last Pesach was the Pesach in the pandemic, the first pandemic. My own view is that Chukim are commands deliberately intended to bypass the rational brain, the prefrontal cortex. The root from which the word chok comes is lachachok, which is to engrave. Writing is on the surface. Engraving cuts much deeper than the surface. Rituals go deep below the surface of the mind. And for an important reason, we are not fully rational animals. We cannot make momentous mistakes, or we can make momentous mistakes if we think we are. We have a limbic system, an emotional brain. We have an extremely powerful set of reactions to potential danger located in the amygdala that lead us to flee, freeze, or fight. A moral system to be adequate to the human condition must recognize the nature of the human condition. It must speak to our fears. Can I have some more text, please, Sean? Thank you. Okay, a moral system to be adequate to the human condition must recognize the nature of the human condition. That's just glorious. That's just gorgeous. I just want to repeat it again. You have to be Jonathan Sacks to write that. A moral system to be adequate to the human condition must recognize the nature of the human condition. It must speak to our fears. Now, here we go. Put on your seatbelt. The most profound fear most of us have is death. As whatever this guy said, neither the sun nor death can be looked on with a steady eye. Few who have explored death and the tragic shadow it casts over life more profoundly than the author of Kohelet. Sean, a little more text, please. So now he's going to bring Kohelet in. This is the Kohelet part of Kohelet, Tolstoy, and the Red Heifer. The fate of man is the fate of cattle. The same fate awaits them both. The death of one is like the death of the other. Their spirits are the same, and the preeminence of man over beasts is nothing, for it is all shallow breath. All end in the same place, all emerge from dust and go back to dust. Then, okay, so in other words, Kohelet is reckoning with the fact that whatever animal you want to talk about, your cat, your dog, your parrot, or some beast of the field, in the end, they die. And guess what? So do we. So how are we any different from any animal of the field? He goes on, now this is Jonathan Sachs. The knowledge that he will die robs Kohelet of any sense of the meaningfulness of life. We have no idea what will happen after our death, to what we have achieved in life. Death makes mockery of virtue. The hero may die young while the coward lives to old age. And bereavement is tragic in a different way. To lose those we love is to have the fabric of our life torn, perhaps irreparably. Death defiles in the simplest, darkest sense. Mortality opens an abyss between us and God's eternity. In other words, why does any of this stuff matter? You know, all the stuff I've done, all the stuff, the money I've earned and the good that I've done and the values I've taught, like the animal of the field, I'm going to be dead. What's the difference? What difference does it all make? That's kind of the deep fear. And again, he's writing knowing that his clock is very much ticking. Now comes the red heifer. And what you're about to read now, no Jew in the history of analysis ever said this. And this is just so much better and so much wiser than anything Maimonides, Nachmanides, or the Talmud ever said. This is the wisest and truest thing ever said about Numbers 19. It is this fear, existential and elemental, to which the right of the heifer is addressed. The animal itself is the starkest symbol of pure animal life, untamed, undomesticated. The red, like the scarlet of the wolf, is the color of blood, the essence of life. The cedar, the tallest of trees, represents vegetative life. The hyssop symbolizes purity. All these were reduced to ash in the fire, a powerful drama of mortality. Then the ash itself was then dissolved in water, symbolizing continuity, the flow of life, and the potential of rebirth. The body dies, but the spirit flows on. A generation dies, but another is born. Lives may end, but life does not. Those who live after us continue what we began, and we live on in them. Life is a never-ending stream, and a trace of us is carried onward to the future. Let me pause for now. The Bafo end is gonna be Tolstoy in a minute, but Sean, I'll take, and Sean, remember this place because we're gonna pick up with the Tolstoy right after, the continues next, but if I can have the full screen, please, I'd like to kind of revisit with the class. So his interpretation, unlike any of the others who went before, is it's a chok, because it is, and from the root chet kuf kuf, to engrave, to go deeper, to incise. What's the deepest fear? The deepest fear is our own mortality. And the deepest fear is of what value then is my life if it's going to end? And the answer is we take all the stuff that seems to be full of life. The red heifer is red and perfect, full of life. The scarlet is red, full of life. The hyssop is pure. The cedar tree is the tallest, strongest, most glorious tree. It's all reduced to ashes, mortality. But then that mortality is put in flowing water, and then the flowing water is spritzed on the person who's been reduced, rendered impure. And it is a drama to suggest that, to put it starkly, you may have a finite number of Pesach Seders left, but how can you enjoy this Pesach Seder? because your loved ones will be doing Pesach Seders without you when you're gone, based on what you have taught them. Your values continue. It is a living stream. And this is a kind of symbolic, cosmic drama that shows that it's a living stream. What we'll see in a minute, and I'll just frame this, and then I'd love to hear your voices. I've been talking entirely too much. Is Jonathan Sacks brings Tolstoy. And at this point, Tolstoy is riding high. As framed by Rabbi Sacks, Tolstoy has written Anna Karenina. He has written he's written War and Peace. He's written Anna Karenina. He is famous. He is an author that is applauded in his lifetime, which often does not happen, that people sometimes don't get recognized till after they die. He's applauded in his lifetime. He's rich. He's married. He has kids. He seems to have it all. He's got his health. He's in his 50s. He's got his health. And he's struggling because he knows it's finite. Tick tock, mortality. And in the end, Tolstoy says the only answer is faith. Only faith, a life of faith, can assuage my deep existential fear. Because if a life of faith, I know that there are values that are going to live on after me. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, I just want to get some of your reactions. How are you reacting to the question Jonathan Sacks poses and to his answer based on the interpretation of Numbers 19? Love to hear your voices. Anyone? Dear class, Debbie Ginsburg, thank you. I'm giving you a free bagel with tuna fish if you come on Shabbos in gratitude for your being the first speaker.
Thank you, but I don't like those bagels.
Okay.
Well, he's prominent, so everybody hears and reads what he has to say. And he has been lucky in life, gifted with, I'm sure, an outgoing personality and great intelligence.
You're talking about Jonathan Sacks?
Yes.
Okay.
And I guess his children remain deeply committed to Judaism. But what about those of us who have children who don't seem to be committed to a parent's way of life? I mean, that's what myself and a lot of people struggle with. A generation that is not as committed as I have been, and certainly my parents. And it seems like a dilution with each passing generation with assimilation. So he's lucky, and he's had a marvelous life, able to instill his values and his faith upon his offspring. But not all of us can feel that way.
And in that case, Debbie, let me ask you this. What is and you'll see in a minute with the quote from Tolstoy, that if the ultimate anguish is the anguish of our mortality, and therefore, what was it all about? And therefore, what's left of it? And therefore, what's the meaning and measure of my days? And therefore, what's my legacy? Like, that's some serious existential anguish.
Yeah. And
Tolstoy, and by the way, that's human, that's universal. If you're a sentient being and you care, that's 100% of the people on the screen, 100% of humans who are sentient and care. That's all of our concern. That goes with the human condition. Our mortality raises the question, therefore, what was it all about, right? What's left, etc. And Jonathan Sacks's answer and Tolstoy's answer, which we'll get to, is that the only thing that is even close to commensurate with the level of that worry is a life of faith. And let's interpret that broadly, because then you can tag the next generation. And whatever your values, and They could be religious values, or they could be human values, or they could be decency values, or they could be menschlichkeit values, or they could be family and friends values, or they could be community values. But some values that are more than eating and drinking and sleeping, some values that you believed in, you imparted to the next generation, and they keep it going. Does that scratch your existential itch, Debbie? And if not, what does?
Well, I have been able to instill some of my values in our children, and for that I'm grateful. But then I recognize that there are some major issues that I feel I have failed with. And I don't want to, I'm not the kind to open up to mere strangers, but you know, toward the end of your life, you do think about your legacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Debbie. John Boris.
For me, I understand Debbie's issue well, but for me, that is the meaning of life. That your kids, not only you've instilled, but they may or may not have taken up. They're individuals. They're going to decide what they're going to do. But the older our sons get, the more they happily report to us that they can see us in them. There are many differences amongst the three of our sons. There are many differences that they do, but we see how it plays out in their lives, in our grandkids' lives. That's very satisfying. And I think that's what certainly gives me personally much less dread about dying. I've done what I've done. They will do what they're going to do. My mentees will learn what they're going to learn. But this flowing, that they will take something of me, the good and the bad, really is very satisfying to me.
John, let me ask you a question that goes to the second question that I teed up. The first one was, what's the meaning of Numbers 19 and this opaque ritual? And the second question was, why? And it's a separate question. It's an independent question. Whatever the meaning is in general, we would read it, once a year. We'd read it once a year. It gets its due like every other chapter of the Torah. We'd read it once a year. Why is it that the rabbis select this portion a few weeks before Passover to get us thinking about before the Passover Seders? And based on Rabbi Sachs's explanation, it is because Passover is a generational conversation. It's about grandparents and grandchildren, parents and children. It's about the transmission of values. And this is a continuity thing and the flowing of values. And I'm just wondering, do you ever ask yourself the question, how many Passovers do I have left? Or is that a question that is just like too hard to ask? And what's the point of asking it?
I don't ask myself that a lot because I know it's not in my control. It will be what it will be. And I want to celebrate and enjoy my time with my family and the holiday each time. We're going to have our youngest grandson come from Colorado for his first Seder here. He wants to come. That's very meaningful to me. But I have no control over this. My last Seder. My last Seder will be 10 years from now. Who knows? That doesn't. I don't obsess over that.
But what matters is that you imbue this Seder with as much meaning and purpose as possible. And it sounds like that's about the flow of conversation and values from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other people want to comment yet on the material we have seen so far? Anybody?
Wes,
Yes.
um,
Say Sandy Klein,
Yeah, surprising.
please.
I have hosted the Seder for the past 30 plus years. And it's been a very wonderful experience of generations together and discussing the Seder in relation to life and transitions and everything. And Danielle came to me several weeks ago and said, we got together, Ailey and I and my nephew and niece, Leah and Avi, who are kind of like our sort of children since my brother-in-law died when they were very, very young. And we helped my sister in many ways. So anyway, the four of them are kind of like brother and sister. And they got together and they said, if I am willing, they would like to move the Seder, change it up, and take over in another location.
Mm.
And my response was, I was a little sad, but I said, as long as the family stays together and the tradition continues and we have this continuity, I'm fine with it. And Danielle said, well, that's what we feel, is that if we move it and change it up, it will continue and sustain itself. And to me, that was the most important thing, is that I've started it over 30 years ago and they're taking on the mantle and they're going to continue it.
Mm. The flow. The flow of life.
That's right.
The flow of life. Thank you, Sandy. Esther Greif.
Yes, I'm probably in a minority here, but not only do I think, will this be my last Seder, I think on many days, will this be my last day, my last week? And I actually feel that heightens my ability to enjoy and be present for that time. So if I go to, you talked about, if you think it's your last Seder, will that make you unable to enjoy it? I think it can have the reverse effect just as much, because it's like, it's my last one. So I was very impressed by Tolstoy, who seemed to have it all. Jonathan Sacks enumerates, he has fame, fortune, family, health, all the things that power perhaps that people aspire to have. And yet he was racked by existential angst and even thought of suicide, and came to his solution of faith. But I don't even think it's about legacy. I think it's about just being yourself. You can't guarantee anything in the future, but you can, what people talk about that sounds trite now, be here now. So in terms of the Seder, I think every year, one thing, I think this could be my last Seder and it could be my last anything.
Wow.
So hope that's not too much of a downer. It's supposed to be an upper, because yeah, each day is precious.
Esther, no good deed goes unpunished. And for sharing that beautiful thought, an important thought, and poignant thought, I'm wondering if you could read the piece in Jonathan Sacks about Tolstoy. So, Sean, could we go back to where we last left off when you were screen sharing? And Esther, if you could read this with conviction. And Sean, if you could just do it all the way. So the person in modern times, if you could lower that page and give us some more text. I mean, right. No, keep going. No, we go down, Sean, please. Go down, Sean, please. Keep going down. Perfect. And Esther, if you could pick that up with the person in modern times.
Okay, although you summarized it already. The person in modern times who most deeply experienced and expressed what Kohelet felt was Tolstoy, who told the story in his essay, A Confession. By the time he wrote it in his early 50s, he had already published two of the greatest novels ever written, War and Peace and Anna Karenina. His literary legacy was secure. His greatness was universally recognized. He was married with children. He had a large estate. His health was good. Yet he was overcome with a sense of the meaninglessness of life in the face of the knowledge that we will all die. He quoted Kohelet at length. He contemplated suicide. The question that haunted him was, is there any meaning
Sean,
in my
if you
life?
could go down to page 8. Sean, please go down to page 8. Thank you.
Is there any meaning in my life that will not be annihilated by the inevitability of death which awaits me?
Keep going.
Keep going. He searched for an answer in science, but all it told him was that in the infinity of space and the infinity of time, infinitely small particles mutate with infinite complexity. Science deals in causes and effects, not purpose and meaning. In the end, he concluded that only religious faith rescues life from meaninglessness. Rational knowledge, as presented by the learned and wise, negates the meaning of life. What is needed is something other than rational knowledge. Faith is the force of life. If a man lives, then he must believe in something. If he does understand the illusion of the finite, he is bound to believe in the infinite. Without faith, it is impossible to live.
Keep going. One more paragraph.
That is why, to defeat the defilement of contact with death, there must be a ritual that bypasses rational knowledge. Hence the rite of the red heifer, in which death is dissolved in the waters of life, and those on whom it is sprinkled are made pure again, so that they can enter the precincts of the Shekhinah and reestablish contact with eternity.
Okay. And Sean, if I can have the full screen. So Esther Greif, what do you, it sounds like you are, very alive to what he's saying. How do you translate his vocabulary of living a life of faith? And in what ways is a life of faith responsive to the mortality that we all share?
Well, actually, the problem I have is for the people who can't find faith, a life of faith. How do they live at all? I mean, because there are many people who rationally cannot come to a life of faith. So, tell me your question again. I don't think I have an answer.
What does a life of faith look like to you?
To me, a life of faith is a recognition that all the superficialities, which I believe you talked about in a sermon recently, money, power, fame, whatever, are elusive. They're fleeting. They're not satisfying ultimately, and that a deeper satisfaction. I've been pondering this a lot lately. Actually, what are the deep truths of life? I think. I mean, for me, I find meaning in Judaism, but it has to go beyond that because not everybody is Jewish. I think it's feeling some connection to all, to the world as one, to the animals, to other people, to nature. And the belief in some superior being is helpful, but people do manage without it. So I don't know if I'm making any sense, but that's sort of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, so it feels like here is the, to me, the ultimate read of this piece for me is one would think that our mortality is a source of angst and agitation and edge and unrest that could drive one to madness or could drive one to the sense that things are meaningless, which is how Kohelet is often interpreted. And what Jonathan Sacks seems to be saying is that if you can connect yourself to the infinite, if you can connect yourself, whatever that means, if you can connect yourself to God, the creator, if you can connect yourself to a value system that is so far beyond you, and you feel somehow that you have lived it as best you could and transmitted it to others, be they disciples, students, children, biological or spiritual, that there comes a measure of peace in being able to let go, in that it's inevitable, so we might as well accept what is inevitable with grace, and that and this feels like a hard degree of freedom, a hard degree of difficulty, but that you can face your own mortality with acceptance and peace and grace, knowing that what you care most about has been transmitted and is going to be lived out. And therefore, somehow that gives you a measure of peace. And that's where this whole thing gets meta, because he writes this right before he dies. Sean, can I get the last paragraph of his essay, please? Keep going. The last paragraph of his essay. Here it is. I believe that we can emerge from the shadow of death if we allow ourselves to be healed by the God of life. To do so, though, we need the help of others. A prisoner cannot release himself from prison, says the Talmud. It took a Kohen to sprinkle the waters of cleansing. It takes comforters to lift our grief, but faith from the world of chok, deeper than the rational mind, can help cure our deepest fears. And here it's so meta because he writes this right before he dies, and he's writing about how values continue through the people that you have reached. And here we are reading these words 2 years later. Sean, if I can come back to the full screen, please. So what I wanted to kind of offer you is a model of thinking about our life and the meaning of our life, and our mortality and the meaning of our mortality, that can enable us to actually be at peace. Any last thoughts, comments, or questions? Anybody? So here is your homework. Savor this set of Seders coming up. And please God, we have many, many more. But to John's point, nobody knows how many we have. Nobody knows how many we have. When he wrote this, he had one last left. That was 2020, the first Zoom Seder. And therefore, that very uncertainty even deepens the urgency and the intensity of it. And then my spiritual homework for you is, what does living a life of faith look like? How can it deepen the days you live right now? And how can it help you be more at peace with the very notion inherent in the human condition that all of our days are limited, and therefore all of our days have infinite value and meaning? That all comes from the Para Adumah, the red heifer. Shabbat Shalom, people, and I will see you next, not Shabbat Shalom, thank you, have a good week, and I will see you next Tuesday. Bye.